Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how to use the texture rollers to create a slab bowl or a plate. And so what I have here is I have a slab that I've just rolled out. I'm going to start by taking some white slip. And the reason I'm using white slip is just so that I can see a good color difference between the darker clay and the white slip. So I'm going to just start by just painting this white slip on there. And I'm going to need to let this set a little bit before I use the texture rollers on the surface. So what I'm going to do here is I'll apply this now, and then we'll kind of pause the video here and come back in a little while when this is set up. Now you don't want to let it set up too much. You want the roller to be able to easily cut through the surface. But you don't want the slip so wet that the texture roller just sort of glides across the surface. You want to have it be at least the consistency where the roller can kind of bite into it. And so, and you'll notice here I have a little something right in the middle there. I have a sort of a little bit of a decorative edge here. What I did is when I cut this, I threw out a bigger slab here. Then I used this this small bat to create the circle. And then what I did is I just cut halfway through and then tore the clay, and that created this little bit of a more of an interesting edge there. And so so I think that's it for this segment of the video. We'll pause it and then we'll come back when this is a little bit more set up, and I'll show you how to use the rollers. Okay, so now we've allowed this slip to dry just a little bit, and I don't know if you can see in the video, but basically it's just got, the sheen is sort of gone. There's still a slight sheen there, but, so this has been drying for, about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. And so now it's still, slightly tacky, but it's, I can just barely touch it without it coming off on my fingers. So now it's ready for the texture rollers. Now, obviously, all the different texture rollers will create different surfaces. So what I would do is experiment just on some smaller pieces of clay first before you jump into a larger piece. On this particular one right here, I'm going to use this really spiky roller. Now, I like to use this dowel rod I just control with my fingers here. So I just kind of hold this. You might see some that have handles on them, but this one works for me, and that way I can really easily just switch it out to another roller if I want to add a different texture. So for this particular video, I'm going to use this really spiky one. And so what I'll do is I'm going to just kind of start by just rolling this through, and you can kind of see what that did to the texture. Now you can, the nice thing with the rollers is that you could leave just this texture if you like, or just go over it again, just like that, and do that across the whole thing. And that is certainly, within, a use for these tools. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and forth, several times in different directions. And what I'm looking for with this particular one is kind of just like almost like a stippling across the whole surface. And I'm hoping that that will, I'll get the darker value of the clay coming through, and as well as some difference in the glaze when I go to, when I fire it, so that some of the glaze will pool up into those low areas. And so you can kind of see now what it's doing. It's kind of interesting how some of these patterns kind of develop where you see like areas that aren't stippled. And so I find that kind of interesting. That's, just the pattern of the way that I'm rolling it here, and the pattern of the actual roller, of the spikes on the roller. Okay, so so this is getting pretty close. What I'm kind of do is just kind of get some coverage. Now, obviously, you can use this creatively, and you don't have to cover it all like this, or you could just do part of it, or you could do part of it in this roller and part of it in this different roller, and then maybe go over this when it's a little hard, go over with this when it's a little harder or something. But for this exercise, I'm just going to use this one roller. And so now you can see I have a really nice kind of even texture all the way through. So now this is still a little wet for me to flip over onto the hump mold. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this set a little bit longer. And then when we come back, I will flip it over onto a mold and show you how to throw a foot ring on it. So that's where we are with the texture wheel rollers. And we'll hit pause on the video and we'll come back in a little bit when that is set up a little bit more. Okay, so now this is set up a little bit more. I can easily touch this without it coming off of my hand, but the slab is still, it's still flexible. I can still, bend it and move it around without cracking. So that is critical because the next step here, I'm going to flip this over on a plaster mold. So I want this surface to stay intact. In other words, not get damaged with the surface of the plaster, but I need this to be flexible enough to drape over the mold. And so I'm gonna kind of just bring this to the side here. And this is just a mold that we had in the studio. So often you see these made out of BIS ceramics too. I just happen to like the size of this particular one, so that's why it's plaster. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna flip this upside down, and I'm going to just carefully set this and kind of like sort of eyeballing here to make sure I'm kind of in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slowly try to kind of bend this around the mold. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying not to force it all at once here. But because you have to kind of think about what's happening to the rim. The rim is compressing as it's getting pushed around the plaster. And so what I do is you kind of like work on one side and then the other side kind of comes up a little bit. And but if you just keep going around and kind of just slowly kind of work it around, then you should be able to get it to fit. Now this is, I don't have to do, and I'll smooth those little cracks out later. Those are just from the stretching of the clay. But if you have a really extreme shape, then you might find that the clay can't compress on the rim here. So in those cases, you might have to cut a shape out, like a little V out, and then connect them back together. But for this particular example, this looks like it's working. I think if it were much more extreme than this, I might have to do that. But this is looking pretty good. And so, so now I'm going to move this over to the wheel and I'll show you how to throw a foot ring on the top of it. So we'll hit pause on the video and we'll come back to the wheel. Okay, so now we have our setup here on the wheel. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure it's centered on the wheel. So what you do is you put your hands on the splash pan here on your legs, and you just hold your finger there, and you can see how it's hitting just in that one little spot there. So when it comes around to that spot again, then just kind of inch it back a little bit. Now I first just kind of eyeballed it to put it on there, so it's a little off. But you can see how now it's a little bit closer, and I'll just kind of inch this back a little bit more, and that should be pretty good. Okay. So now you can do the same thing here. Now I have a little bit of a kind of an oblong circle here, and so this is going to be just a little bit off, but I kind of just make a few little adjustments here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some clay down here so that this plaster doesn't slide off the wheel. Okay, so I'm going to do this real quick, and okay. Now, the tools that you're going to need for this are going to be, you might need a sponge, you'll need a needle tool or a scoring tool, and you might need a wooden modeling tool like this to be able to get in if you need to join the foot ring. So what I would also do is roll out a coil first to get started. And so that way, once you get on the wheel here, everything's ready to go. So, well, first thing I guess I should say also is that you're gonna probably need a flexible rib. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna carefully just kind of compress. And what I'm doing here is I'm compressing those the stretch marks in the clay there. And that's just a result of, of the clay stretching over the top here. Also because I had to let it dry a little bit for the slip to be stiff enough that it wouldn't get damaged. So this is just helping to take care of those little cracks and as well as just make the slab stronger. I do want to make sure that I have a nice strong slab here so that it doesn't slump when it's being fired. So usually this is just enough to do it. Sometimes you might need to put a little bit of moisture on that rib, but this is just good enough to be able to take care of all those lines. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to figure out where that foot ring is going to go. So I'm going to just kind of make a couple lines here. And okay, so that's pretty close. I think I might want to come out just a little bit here. Okay, and we'll just come out. Okay, so then what I'll do is I'm just going to smooth out this interior line here. Okay, and so I can just a little bit better see where I'm going to put that foot ring. Okay, so that gives me a place that I know that I can score. Okay, so sometimes I'll just kind of do this with the wheel spinning. Just move your needle tool back and forth. Do it a whole bunch. You really want to make sure and get this attached really well. Now this clay is still pretty soft. When I let that dry, this was on the bottom, so it didn't dry as much as the top. And so I'm just going to use water to attach this. So you might consider using slip if your clay is a little bit drier, but I have really wet coil that I'm going to put down plus a fairly wet slab here. So I'm just going to lay a little bit of water in here, and part of the reason is that I also don't have any slip in this with this clay at the moment. This will do a pretty good job. What I'll do is I'll just kind of score over just a little bit, and this is kind of just making a little bit of a slip consistency here. So okay, so now I know where I'm going to put the coil. I have my coil already rolled out here. Now obviously this is way too long, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to kind of snip the ends off there, because the ends typically are not exactly the same width as the other, as the middle of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just set this around here, and I'm just getting it close. I'm not totally putting it all together right now. And then I'm going to have this be a little bit long here, so that I can, when I smush this together, I'm going to kind of so that I don't have, if I just line the coils like that, then I'm going to have a little bit of a thinner area. So I'd rather have a little bit too much clay here that I can cut off if I need to. So, and I will probably have to cut a little bit of that off. Okay, so now I'm going to just kind of, with the wheel moving really slowly, kind of get a little bit better set in there. I'm kind of pushing down and allowing some of that slip to kind of squirt out here a little bit. And kind of just going all the way around, making sure that things are feeling the right consistency and or thickness rather. And okay, so now I'm gonna actually kind of really start to push it in there a little bit more with my fingers, and I'm gonna make sure I have it really joined well. Now this is important because when I go to actually throw this foot ring, I need to make sure that it's attached really well, and so I don't want it to come off. And that's where this tool comes in handy sometimes, because sometimes it's just a little easier to kind of get in here with this tool and kind of go around and really just make sure you have a good seam there. And so we'll just kind of go around quickly around the whole thing like this. Make sure we have a good seam here, and kind of do that on the outside here. Okay, so a little bit extra care to make sure that this is joined really well now will pay off later when you don't have the thing come off. So, okay, so now I'm ready to actually throw that foot ring. Okay, so I'm gonna just put a little bit of water Now I don't want to get this thing too soaked here, but I'm going to just, you know, just make sure I have enough water to throw. And I'm gonna just kind of work this as I would work a, almost like the rim of a pot, you know. And what I'm doing here is I'm kind of compressing this edge here. I'm compressing this inside edge. And I'm also trying to kind of start to work out the little bumps and little divots that I put into the clay when I was joining the coil. If you do this right, you know, it should look seamless. So you shouldn't have a lot of extra, you know, divots and things like that. Now you can also, if this is a little bit too big, you can actually throw this up just a little bit like this, and then take your needle tool, and especially if you have a little wobble like I have here on the top, and I'm just gonna cut this off, just like I was cutting the rim off of a pot on the wheel. Okay, and so now, you know, I just basically cut off a little ring there, and then what I'll do is, you know, so now I have a nice, you know, a little bit of a flatter foot ring here. Then I might come back with this tool, and I'm just gonna kind of clean up that inside edge a little bit, and kind of compress that. You can also just use your trimming tools, which I sometimes will do on the outside here, just to get a nice sort of line on the on this part that connects to the slab. And so I'll just kind of clean this up a little bit more. And then another thing I forgot to mention too is it is handy to have a chamois here. And so with a chamois, you can really make that nice and smooth, and you know, nice and round. And so let me just take my sponge here, and I'll just make sure and get all that moisture out. Then I'll probably just do a little bit of compression here with my finger, just to make sure that I have a good compressed slab. Also to make sure that the surface is uniform in compression all the way across. So, you know, I just kind of go back and forth like this, and then I'll kind of just do the same thing out here. Sometimes I use a rib for this part, because sometimes it's just so my fingers don't bend like that to get them underneath there. So, you know, and this will just make sure that this surface here is the same as this surface. So since you ribbed this with a metal rib, sometimes it's helpful just to come up here and to just tuck that underneath there like that. And that's pretty good. I might, if this were in a demo, I might actually kind of work on that a little bit more and kind of get that more stylistically, you know, aligned with what I want. But that's how you do it. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let this set up and dry a little bit more. Now I don't want to leave it on there and just let it dry completely, because it will shrink around there and it will crack, because this plaster mold is not shrinking. So I need to be able to pull this off of there so that the rim can shrink down without splitting. You would think that it would just rise up on this thing, but it won't. It'll crack on the edge here. And so now I have a really wet foot ring here, kind of a medium wet or slightly damp slab here. So I sometimes would maybe cover those and let them kind of equalize out. But the moral of the story is that you want to be able to take this off of the plaster before it gets too dry. And so I'll flip that over and set it on its foot ring. And in that way, then it can dry like that. So so that's how you throw a foot ring on your textured slab here. And I'll pause the video and we'll come back when this is a little bit drier and we can see you know, the other side and the surface, and make sure that the surface is still intact. So that's it for this video, and we'll come back here in a minute. Okay, so now this has been setting up on the slab or on this plaster, and it's stiff enough where I can just just barely kind of move it. It's still got a slight flex into it. But again, I want to make sure and get it off of there as soon as I can handle it, because I don't want it to shrink around this plaster. So, so now I'll just kind of carefully lift this off, and I'll flip this over, and let me move this so we can get this a little closer. And so now you can see the sort of finished product here. And so you can kind of see how, because I let that surface set up a little bit, it wasn't damaged by the pressure that I had to push, you know, to put that foot ring on there. And so, you know, and again, I'll leave this kind of rough surface. I might, on the rim, it's, if you can kind of see it, it's got a little bit of a, you know, that's the texture that was created when I tore the slab. So what you can see here, I took a fettling knife and I cut through half of it. So that's that smoother line here. Then when I tore it, it created this kind of beveled edge. Then I softened it by just tapping my hand around it. And that just adds a, you know, some interest to the rim there. You know, it should be interesting when I glaze it too. And so, so now I have my, my textured slab bowl here, foot ring, kind of see the profile of the foot ring there. And then now it's just barely stiff enough where it can stand up on its own here. So that's one way that you can use a texture roller to create objects or vessels with without the wheel. Now certainly the texture roller can be used for all different types of applications for surfacing of sculpture too. And but I just wanted to show you in this video, you know, a way of using the texture roller to create interesting textures on hand-built vessels. So so that's it. And so the best thing to do is just kind of experiment and you know, play around with different texture rollers to create really interesting textures that can do cool things during the glazing process too. So that's it.